Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today, we take you to Boulder, Colorado. On January 6, 2013, it's just after 6 p.m. when a strange call comes into the Boulder County 911. The caller is Michael Giese, an attorney. He says there is a dead body in a house in Table Mesa. The 911 operator asked Michael what happened. Michael says, "I can't tell you. I'm an attorney. I'm just relaying information that I have received." He stated that he was in his office and not on scene with the person, and he refused to answer most questions. Multiple units from the Boulder Sheriff's Department rushed to the scene. All deputies knew was there was a possibility of a homicide or a fatality that happened within this house. Deputies don't know what they are going to be walking into. They established a perimeter, and there were a group of them that responded directly to the front of the house. It was dark, late at night. Inside, deputies see a woman. She was going on as if nothing was wrong. The deputies on scene requested that dispatch contact the residents and call in to get a hold of the female that was inside. Dispatch was able to get her to come out and exit the house. Deputies meet her at the front door. She identifies herself as 70-year-old Theresa Jovano. She tells them that her husband, 72-year-old Ray Jovano, is in bed. Deputy Kenneth, "Where's the bedroom at?" "Theresa, go in the door and down the hall." Theresa tells deputies that she had put a blanket over him. She saw a little blood. Deputy Kenneth, "You didn't check for a pulse or anything like that. I just need to know if I need medics to show up here." Theresa said no. To Deputy Kenneth, Theresa appeared dazed. When she talked to him, she was not looking at him, she was just talking. He started to think that maybe she wasn't in her right frame of mind. She looked at Deputy Kenneth and said, "You just have to go see him." Theresa remains outside while a team cautiously enters the home. They begin to start clearing the house. Deputy Kenneth makes his way down a long hallway, and he gets to the last bedroom. There was blood on the walls. It was an incredible, gruesome sight. The bed is made, but there appears to be a person completely covered from head to toe. Deputy Kenneth walks closer to the bed, at which point he sees a double-barrel shotgun sitting on top of the blankets. The deputy slowly approaches, pulled back the blankets slightly to reveal what turned out to be Ray Jovano. There was no mistaking that Ray Jovano could not be saved. There appeared to be a gunshot wound to the side of the face. His face was missing. The deputies lower their weapons and call for detectives. Once they arrive, Deputy Kenneth gives them a play-by-play of what occurred. It was very bizarre. They're quickly trying to size up whether or not this is a self-exit or if it's a homicide. Detectives examine the gun laying next to Ray on the bed. A pistol-gripped, sawed-off shotgun. It seemed to be neatly placed next to his left hand. The butt was down fairly low towards his feet and not within reach of his hand. So that was the first indication that this was not a self-exit. The second red flag comes when they take a close look at the gunshot wound to the left side of Ray's head. The entry was large, and there was gunpowder residue that would indicate that the end of the weapon that was used was several inches away from his head. None of that is consistent with a self-wound. A person doesn't hold a shotgun away from their head when they self-exit in that manner. This was not a self-exit. This was a homicide. At that point in time, Ray's daughter, Angela Kellogg, was contacted and given the news that something had happened to her father. Ray Jovano was born on February 3, 1940. Growing up in the Boulder, Colorado, Ray studied environmental science at CSU. He used his degree to turn his passion for the outdoors into a paycheck. Ray worked for the Bureau of Land Management. For many years, Ray focused on his career and raising 3 kids with his first wife. But when the kids left home, Ray's marriage came to an end and he enjoyed the unfettered life of a bachelor. Ray was an all-in family man. That divorce did rock the family heavily, but it did not destroy it by any means, and Ray was still a good father. In the late 80s, Ray was working in Boulder County when he reconnected with an old friend, Theresa Winters. They met when they were in middle school, and they were maybe kind of boyfriend-girlfriend at a very young age. Like Ray, Theresa was also single with grown children. In 1985, she was widowed when she lost her husband, Larry Winters. Larry Winters had a property portfolio worth about $1 million, so she took over all that. She was fairly well off when she met Ray Jovano. They called each other and began to talk. They got along well. They then began to date. Ray was attracted to Theresa's can-do spirit. She is also extremely intelligent with a technical mind. After dating for 4 years, they married on September 2nd, 1990, and moved into Theresa's sprawling Boulder home. They were sort of society types. They liked to mingle. They were well known and respected. After 2 decades together, the hardworking couple had a large enough nest egg to retire. They spent their newfound freedom giving back. She was friendly. She was doting over Ray. Often next to him, would stay by him a lot. Ray was a volunteer at the sheriff's department. He was a man who was deeply involved in his community. He always was doing something productive. She was kind of that way, too. They were happy. By 2013, Ray and Theresa had been together for nearly 30 years. But on January 6th, their life together comes to a sudden and bizarre end. In the bedroom, they find Ray, and it's this absolutely horrific scene. After Boulder investigators rule out self-exit, they check in with Theresa, who's outside the home with sheriff's deputies. Ray Jovano was seated in the back of one of the patrol vehicles, and she was being very cooperative. She simply seemed to have no emotion. Psychologically speaking, it could mean she might be having a dissociative moment where she experienced something traumatic. Detectives stated to her that she was going to be taken to their office for an interview in a more comfortable location to sit. There's a lot of things that need to be answered. They need to know more information about what had occurred. January 6, 2013. Boulder County detectives are investigating the homicide of 72-year-old Ray Jovano after he was found dead in his bedroom from a gunshot wound to the head. While his wife, Theresa Winters, is on her way to the sheriff's department, detectives try to make sense of the horrifying scene inside the home. The victim was completely under the blankets, appeared to be in sleeping attire. There was a large hole to the left side of his head near the cheek area that carried on through the skull and out the right side of his head. There are some indications that Ray has been dead for some time. The blood is congealed. Rigor mortis has set in. He's cold to the touch. It appears as if several hours have passed since he was killed. While the scene in the bedroom is gruesome, the rest of the house is untouched. The windows were all secure. The doors were secure. It didn't appear that anybody had tried to break into the home. As a matter of fact, the home was very clean. At this point during the investigation, they have little information. They have a homicide, and they have a woman who is the wife of the decedent that claims to not know what happened. Investigators head to the sheriff's office where they meet up with the widow in an interview room. During the interview, she appears to be very calm and relaxed as they're questioning her. They are wanting to know what happened that evening and have her lead them through the course of events. But the only memories Theresa has are of the night before. She remembers taking down Christmas decorations, watching a movie, a pleasant evening. After 9 p.m., she does not remember. Detective asked Theresa why the attorney dialed 911 to report the crime and not her. She said she does not know how that happened. She remembers nothing until deputies arrived. Theresa tells them that she does have one vague memory from the night. She remembers seeing a gun. She saw her husband was bleeding. Detective, what was your first thought? I thought he was having a nosebleed. He gets a lot of nosebleeds. And was he actively bleeding? I just saw just a little bit of blood on the pillow area. She said she had put a blanket over his head because he had a nosebleed. It was rather strange because having been in that scene, what was in that house was a very traumatic, bloody scene that could not anywhere remotely be confused with a nosebleed. Theresa attempts to explain her lack of memory. Detective, you talked about a gray fog. Yeah, it's just like I don't know. It's like everything around me is like in a kind of a shadow. Detective, okay. Because it seems like you've lost pretty much all of today. And part of last night. Theresa, I don't know why. If she's truly experiencing psychogenic amnesia, the amnesia could have been just for the death of Ray, the traumatic incident. And now she's experiencing emotion in real time. Then the interview takes yet another bizarre turn. Detective Syed, well, you pretty much already know your husband's dead. Theresa said, is he dead? Detective said, yes. And at that point, she starts to become overcome with emotion and crying. Theresa said he can't be dead. Stunned, investigators take a different tack. Detective let her talk. They let her talk about whatever topic she wanted. And she had told them, essentially, that she and Ray's relationship was great. Theresa said, I love him more than life itself. Theresa's behavior stumps investigators. Is she truly experiencing psychogenic amnesia, Or she could be portraying an emotional wife who has learned that her husband has died. When they look at the very rare situations in which psychogenic amnesia is present, this temporary memory loss, it's protecting the person from what happened in the moment. Then, investigators get some alarming news. In the middle of interviewing Theresa, detective receives a text on his phone. And it was the investigators. They had said they had some very important information that could spin his investigation in a completely different direction. He left the interview room, and the detective handed him a case from 1985 where Theresa was a suspect in a homicide in that very same home. Investigators in Boulder, Colorado, are interviewing Theresa Jovano about the murder of her husband, Ray Jovano, when they receive some alarming news. In 1985, Theresa's first husband, Ray Winters, was also murdered. Someone put out the word, "Hey, you remember back in 1985, Ray Winters? That's the same woman. That's the same house. It's the same kind of murder. It's the same room." There was still the record of the 911 call from 1985. The operator asked Theresa, "What's the problem?" Theresa said, "I think I shot my husband." Dispatch said, "Were you having an argument and this occurred?" Theresa said, "No, I don't know. I don't remember anything." Ray Winters was murdered, and he also died laying in bed, was shot. And she had also claimed some amnesia in that case. Theresa was arrested at the scene and immediately charged with Ray Winters' murder. The attorney that represented her during that trial was attorney Michael Giese, and that is the same attorney that had made the telephone call to 911. Upon her arrest in 1985, Theresa claimed to have amnesia, but at her trial about 5 months later, she seemed to have recovered memories from the day Ray was killed. It was only after she worked with a psychologist that she was able to somehow remember what had happened. Theresa testified that on the day of the murder, she confronted Ray with divorce papers. She was confronting her then-husband, Ray Winters, because he molested her daughter, and she was driven to protect her daughter. She alleged that the discussion escalated into a physical confrontation. She says he began to sexually assault her and that he put a gun to her head. Theresa claimed that a struggle ensued, but she managed to get the gun from Ray's hands. She shot and killed him in self-defense. She was acquitted. At trial, the defense really was able to make Ray Winters out to be a sexual predator. And Theresa was motivated because of these terrible things that he had done. According to court records, while Theresa opted not to press charges against Ray Winters at the time, her daughter always maintained that he was guilty of molestation. In the end, Theresa Winters was acquitted of Ray's murder. Armed with this new information, Boulder County investigators head back to the interview room to confront Theresa about Ray's death. "Detective, did you have a second husband?" Theresa, "Yes." "Detective, how did he die?" Theresa, he was a child molester. He ended up dying. And when it comes to details, once again Theresa's memory fails her. "Detective, you don't remember what that was or the circumstances around that." Theresa, "It's so long ago. I don't know." Detectives continue to hold Theresa in the interview room as they keep digging. The investigators were also making contact with family members and seeing if they can get more information. Investigators learned that Ray and Theresa's marriage had been on the rocks for some time, largely because Theresa was convinced that Ray was having an affair with a woman in Nigeria. Family does not know how interested in this other woman he was, Ray being 72 and she's approximately 40 years old, but Theresa was concerned about that. Whether the affair was real or not, Theresa claims Ray's dalliance didn't bother her. According to Theresa, Ray said to her, "You are the most perfect wife anybody could ever want. I don't know why I did what I did. I am working on it." Theresa told Ray that she loves him unconditionally. Despite Theresa's explanations, detectives are skeptical. They have the 1985 case that show that Theresa had used the same MO. There were a lot of similarities. They had enough probable cause to arrest Theresa at this point. Before Theresa heads to the county jail, detectives request she get checked out at a local hospital. While under observation, Theresa seems to have cognitive functioning intact and memory intact, but they do alert detectives to some concerning physical injuries. She's got this abrasion in the middle of her chest. She also has a problem with one of her fingers. Both the injury to her finger and the bruise to her chest would be very consistent with Theresa having held that sawed-off shotgun and having the gun pushed back violently and striking her in the chest. Autopsy results confirm Ray's cause of death, but pinpointing the time of death is more complicated. There had been beginning stages of decomposition. That gives investigators a timeline. Ray had died many hours before they were even contacted, before the report of the homicide. Hoping to get more details of the timeline, investigators reach out to the man who made the initial 911 call, Theresa's former defense attorney, Michael Giese. And they soon learn he did more than just call the police that day. He had met with his client out at the crime scene for about an hour and a half before he went to his office and made that call. Michael Giese has always maintained that he never entered the home. He remained in the driveway, and he met with his client inside of his vehicle. He didn't stay at the scene. He didn't stay with his client. He left her on her own to deal with law enforcement. He refused to answer any questions. He didn't know if he was going to be her attorney or not, and that most of this was going to have to wait. That is what a criminal defense attorney representing a client almost certainly should do. The obvious conflict that he would create if he became a witness in a case against his client, Theresa Winters. Investigators push forward, continuing to build their case. They reach out again to Ray's daughter, 47-year-old Angela Kellogg, who agrees to come in for an interview. The very first thing that she brought up is that Theresa had been the suspect in the homicide in 1985, and they knew about it. Ray knew about it, but Ray didn't seem to be too worried and believe her that it was in self-defense. Like Theresa, Angela mentions the infidelity, but says that Theresa was extremely upset that Ray might be having an affair, so much so that it had driven Ray to seek a divorce in September of 2012. She was texting Angela, asking why he is doing this. Is he in love with somebody else? One string of texts, Theresa is very hopeful that she and Ray are going to get back together. The next one, she is despondent about Ray leaving her and about their relationship ending. 2 months later, Theresa convinced Ray to come back to the family home, at least temporarily. Theresa was scheduled to have hip surgery, and she needed someone to help her. Ray moved back. He stated that upon her recovery, he was going to move to Hawaii and end their relationship. The night before the murder, Ray was still at the home in Boulder when Angela received the last text she would ever get from Theresa. During that last exchange, Theresa indicated that she had caught Ray on the phone with his girlfriend from Nigeria. Angela said Theresa was very concerned with Ray being on the phone with this woman. Talking to Angela, that kind of gives us a little bit of context. Theresa actually was angry about the relationship dissolving. Theresa never mentioned that to investigators or anything about Ray leaving the home. The moment somebody leaves is the moment that is most dangerous. Days after the heinous murder of Ray Jovano, investigators are homing in on Ray's wife, Theresa Winters, as the prime suspect. Once they had received the search warrants, they went back to the residence, and they found a series of handwritten journals that were Theresa's. They claim to have started in 1985. She portrays herself in the journals as a faithful, loving wife whose husband, Ray, is mistreating her, and she forgives him. While reading the journals, investigators can't ignore a growing hunch. There are aspects of them that would suggest they are fabricated. Some of the entries had dates, and most did not. And again, the chronology you would expect, you would write and fill a page, and you would go on to the next page. The chronology following it in that context did not really fit, and that is why investigators strongly suspect that they were written retrospectively. That would indicate a great deal of planning. The amount of time that it would take to fill years' worth of journals would have to have been started months in advance. Hoping to bolster their case for first-degree murder, investigators keep digging. They felt that writing a search warrant for the cell phone records of Theresa may give them more information. When they received the results of those cell phone records, it was alarming. In the hours after investigators believe Ray was murdered, they traced Theresa's movements. During her interview, Theresa had claimed that she never left the house on the weekend of the murder. But they found out that her cell phone traveled from the house down to Colorado Springs. So this was not a woman who was in a fog. This was not a woman who had remained in the house like she claimed. Records show that following Ray's murder, Theresa made the 2-hour drive to Colorado Springs, arriving there around 10 in the morning. On her way home, she makes a stop because her car becomes inoperable. And because of that, she has to call AAA and ask for a tow truck. They were able to get the recording of Theresa Winters calling AAA. May I have your name, please? Theresa Winters. Yes, Ms. Jovano. Are you in a safe location? She was very articulate. She stated where she was at, what she needed, how to get there. There doesn't seem to be any confusion. And that was just the information that they were looking for to confirm that this claim of amnesia is false. They're able to find that not only does she leave her home, Then on her way home, she's able to have the wherewithal to give her location accurately to AAA. Now investigators want to know where Theresa was headed and why. They found one of the towers the phone pinged off of was right next to Theresa Jovano, adult son's residence in Colorado Springs. They found that to be odd because during this period, she was claiming to be in a gray fog. After finding this information, they attempted to contact her son, Jason LaForest. Initially, Jason said he didn't have any contact with his mother on Sunday, January 6th. However, Jason tells investigators that his mother did try to call him that morning. She was in Colorado Springs, and she was hoping to meet up with him. But he insisted that he never actually met up with her. He was unable to do so because Jason had gone out to brunch with his fiancée. Certain there is more to this story, detectives take a closer look at Theresa and Ray's finances, and they stumble across something that sparks their interest. Theresa and Ray had actually divorced for about a year in 2004. And apparently, the divorce was done so that Theresa could take advantage of some financial death benefits from her former husband, Ray Winters. She got his survivor benefits, like $1,100 a month. They had remarried after Theresa had been able to secure those benefits. At the very least, it proved how keenly focused Theresa was on finances. Investigators learned that Theresa could expect another payday following Ray's death. Ray had had a long career and a pension, and they were well off with an estate of approximately $1 million. In both cases, she stood to gain from the demise of her husband. As detectives are collecting evidence of Theresa's motives, they get a strange call from Michael Giese. He stated that he had some possessions that were given to him that he wanted or felt that needed to be turned over to law enforcement. He didn't tell detectives the relevance of it, and essentially, attorney Michael Giese had stated, "You'll find out." As Theresa Jovano awaits trial for the shooting death of her husband, Ray Jovano, investigators get a surprising phone call from Michael Giese. He represented her in Ray Winters' homicide, and he was representing her in the homicide now. He had property that belonged to Ray Jovano, and it included a large coin collection. Detectives subsequently learned that those items were brought to him by Theresa Jovano's son, Jason. He took all those items and gave them to Michael Giese, as opposed to giving them to the police. Jason claimed that he found the items in his garage after his mother had been arrested for the murder of Ray Jovano. Theresa brought a bunch of coins down to Jason, left them in his garage. The entire collection was probably worth in the range of $20,000 to $40,000. On March 17, 2015, the trial for Ray's murder gets underway. When the coin collection is addressed, it points to more scheming by Theresa. She claimed at trial that she moved the coin collection so that they wouldn't be stolen, but that never made particular sense to detectives. They strongly suspect that she had some idea that she would stage the house to look like it had been broken into and could claim that she came home and she found Ray and he must have been killed by whoever broke into the house. Detectives believe that Theresa had shifting ideas about what she was going to do to get away with this crime, and so it seemed that's something that she abandoned and didn't follow through. Prosecutors lay out a timeline of events leading up to Ray's murder. Theresa and Ray had dinner on Saturday night and watched some television. Ray, at some point in time, must have disclosed that it was his plan to leave on Sunday. With Ray set to leave the next morning, Theresa came up with a plan. She waited until he was asleep, and she went into that bedroom with that sawed-off shotgun, and she leaned across that bed and shot him at near point-blank range, killing him instantly. Theresa then spent the next several hours plotting her defense. One of the ideas was trying to clean up the crime scene, and she pretty quickly abandoned that idea because it was just overwhelming. Instead, Theresa called the same man who helped her back in 1985, defense attorney Michael Giese. She called her lawyer from the crime scene, and then he calls police. And she met with him hours before law enforcement was notified. In court, the defense struggles to find their footing the second time around. The defense kept presenting different defenses: self-exit, accident, self-defense, amnesia. They fluctuated between those different ideas, much like Theresa seemed to fluctuate between different ideas as to how she was going to cover up the murder. The recording of the call to AAA was really compelling because the jury was able to hear in Theresa's own voice, in own words, that she was aware of her surroundings, cognizant. She was answering questions and giving information. This wasn't a woman who was in a fog. Theresa claimed at one point that Ray had assaulted her earlier in that evening. In the middle of the trial, Theresa says that she starts to get some memory back, and then she's able to get some flashes about some sort of struggle in which she described she can feel the shotgun with her hands and that Ray ends up taking control and accidentally fires the weapon in which he is killed. none of which is supported by any of the crime scene evidence whatsoever. After a 5-week trial, it takes the jury less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. She was convicted of first-degree murder. She was also convicted of a special allegation of using a firearm in order to commit the murder, resulting in an overall sentence of 50 years to life for Theresa Winters. She died in prison in June 2022. She was 80 years old. Even though Theresa finally ended up behind bars, Ray's family still grapples with what could have been. They think of Grandpa Ray all the time. They talk about him, his children and their children, 5 grandkids total, and that's the legacy that hopefully will live on, and the kids will all learn who he was and what he did and carry that on forever. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Tom's True Crime. If you are interested in more in-depth investigations into the most perplexing crimes, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share them with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe.